You've been staring at the same problem for hours, days, maybe even months. You've tried brainstorming, revisiting the data, asking friends for advice, and nothing changes. The ideas you generate feel like echoes of the same old thoughts. Thinking more isn't the solution. What you need is a new way to think, a way to see your thinking before you try to solve the problem. Today, we're going to do exactly that. You're going to learn how to step outside your own mind and start thinking differently, creatively, and deliberately. Most people assume that thinking harder will lead to a solution. Sound familiar? But here's the problem. If the inputs going into your brain and the processes your brain uses are the same, the outputs, your ideas, are going to be the same too. Think about it like this. If you always solve problems by listing pros and cons, you'll keep coming up with the same pros and cons. If your default is to analyze logically, you'll miss intuitive connections. And if you always rely on experience from your own field, you'll miss ideas from completely different contexts. Even asking smart, experienced people for advice only works if you know how to integrate that advice differently. Otherwise, you're just repeating mental loops. And that's where metacognition comes in. Metacognition is simply the ability to think about your own thinking, to notice the patterns, strengths, and weaknesses in your thought processes, and then to regulate them. In other words, it's the tool that lets you step back and ask, am I thinking the right way for this problem? Before you try to solve it. Now, researchers break metacognition into 3 practical components, each giving you a lever to change how you think. Let me break them down for you one by one. First, there's metacognitive knowledge, which is knowing your own cognitive patterns, your habits, your blind spots, your strengths and weaknesses. For example, maybe you always start problem solving by generating 5 ideas, or maybe you always analyze things logically first. Recognizing these patterns is the first step. You can't change what you don't see. Then there is metacognitive experience, which is how thinking feels. Does your thinking feel easy and fluent, or does it feel clunky and disjointed? Feeling a mental disfluency isn't a bug, it's a signal. It tells you that your usual thinking patterns aren't enough and can push you into analytical or creative modes you don't normally activate. Then there is metacognitive monitoring and control, which is the action piece. It's stepping back and asking, is this strategy working? Then, if needed, deliberately choosing a different approach, whether that's a new framework, a new perspective, or a completely different set of inputs. Now, when you combine these 3 components, you get a kind of thinking layout. You can see where your thinking is going, detect when it's stuck, and reroute yourself towards new paths. Now, here's where things get practical. Let's talk about 2 levers you can pull to think differently. Inputs and processes. Sounds easy, right? So first, the inputs, varied inputs. They're the simplest way to get a new idea, right? Feed your brain something it hasn't seen before. That could mean reading something outside your field, talking to people you normally wouldn't interact with, or exposing yourself to new experiences. For instance, a software developer struggling to design an app might read a book on urban architecture. Suddenly, new patterns of structure and flow might inspire their interface. And then there's varied processes. These are equally important. Inputs alone aren't enough. You also need to process them differently. That might mean switching from divergent to convergent thinking, deliberately inverting your assumptions, or forcing yourself to create analogies from unrelated domains. For example, a writer stuck on a story plot might try brainstorming by imagining the plot as a chess game, moving ideas around like pieces to see new possibilities. So metacognition tells you when to switch inputs and when to switch processes. You can notice the signals, right? Feeling stuck, repetitive, or fluent without novelty, and then intentionally redirect yourself. At this point, most people understand the idea, but still do nothing differently. So let's make this concrete. When you're stuck, there are 3 steps that reliably break mental loops. Not by thinking harder, but by changing how you think. Ready? Step 1, it's identify repetitive thought loops. A thought loop is a pattern of thinking where you approach the same problem repeatedly in the same way, producing the same or slightly modified outcomes. They're often invisible because they feel natural or automatic. You can spot them by tracking your ideas. Write down every solution you've already tried, including the ones you abandoned early, partially explored, or considered but never executed. Writing things down helps you see these things better. Then look for patterns. Ask yourself, are you approaching the problem using the same logic every time? Are the solutions just variations of the same idea? Or are you automatically assuming certain constraints that may not actually exist? Also, emotional cues matter here. Repetition often comes with frustration. Feeling stuck, bored, or mentally fatigued is a sign your mind is circling. This disfluency, the sense that you're thinking hard without making progress, is your brain signaling that it's stuck. All right, step 2, map your strategies. Not all thinking is the same. If you want to change how you think, you first have to notice how you're already doing it. I'll share the main thinking strategies for you here. First, there's analytical thinking. It's a step-by-step reasoning, breaking problems into parts. Its strength is structure and clarity, but it can miss patterns that aren't obvious. There's intuitive thinking. It relies on your gut feelings, instincts, or subconscious knowledge. It's fast and often insightful, but it's also prone to bias and blind spots. There's divergent thinking. It generates many possible solutions and explores multiple directions. It's creative and expansive, but it can lack focus. Then there's convergent thinking. It narrows options down to the best solution. It's efficient for decision making, but it can prematurely eliminate unconventional ideas. There's analogical thinking. Compares your problem to an unrelated situation and transfers insights across domains. It can produce novel connections, but it becomes weak if the analogy is forced or superficial. There is also reflective thinking, which is actively questioning assumptions and processes. It helps prevent repeated mistakes, but it's slow and mentally demanding. Okay? So mapping these strategies gives you a clear picture of your usual mental approach and shows you what you tend to overuse or ignore. I'm going to include these in the description so you can kind of compare them against what strategies you usually use. Step 3, introduce one new input and one new process. Once you know how you're thinking, the goal is to change what goes in and how it's handled. So a new input is anything outside the information you usually consider. That could mean reading something unrelated to your field, attending a lecture in a completely different discipline, or trying a new experience altogether. Research on creativity and problem solving shows that people with varied experiences are better at combining ideas from different contexts. When your brain encounters something unexpected, it's forced to form new connections. For example, someone stuck trying to improve a personal routine might learn a completely unrelated skill, like playing an instrument, and discover new habits or mental patterns that spark a solution. A new process is a structured way of working with information differently. This might mean using frameworks like Scamper to examine a problem from multiple angles, or 6 thinking hats to force different modes of thinking, or mind mapping to visually connect ideas that don't emerge in linear lists. Here are the steps again as a simple framework you can start using today. Identify repetitive thought loops by writing down the problems you're stuck on and the ideas you've already tried. Map your strategies, analytical, intuitive, divergent, convergent, and label them. Then introduce one new input and one new process, like reading an unrelated article or brainstorming using a different framework. And then reflect. What did this new approach reveal? How did it feel? Was it effective? Adjust your approach and repeat. The key is to change your thinking deliberately. This is not about working harder or longer. It's about working differently, consciously, and with awareness. So here's the takeaway. If you're stuck, the problem isn't your effort, it's your perspective. Metacognition gives you the tools to step outside your mental loops, experiment with new inputs and processes, and find solutions you couldn't see before. If you're genuinely stuck, I offer one-on-one video sessions where we map your thinking in real time and redesign how you're approaching the problem. This isn't motivation or coaching, it's targeted intervention. The link is below in the description. And again, if you're interested in a one-on-one, the link is below in the description. See you soon.